Welcome back to our Xfinity Pro Track Guide here at Kern Raceway this week. Obviously, Nick Ottinger here. I'm going to kind of give you guys some tidbits how we can navigate Kern Speedway. This week, we're going to have some really, I would say, scorching temperatures, really. You're going to have anything from 125 degree track temp all the way up to 140 plus track temp. For our testing weather, obviously, you guys will have this in the notes as well that are provided to you guys. But our testing weather, we're at 141 track temp here. So, really hot, really greasy. And in that same mindset of how the track is pretty hot, it means we got to really find ways to generate grip and sustain grip to the front tires, to the rear tires. So, I'm going to let this play through for about 2 or 3 laps. I've done a 30 lap run here on this little test run, and kind of talk about some tidbits that is important for us to look at and to feel in the car and how to navigate that. So with that said, I'm going to let this play through. All right, I'm gonna switch to cockpit view here. Gonna go the same thing. Let this run through here in a couple moments time. But as you could tell, let's debrief on that chase perspective a little bit. Let's kind of get our brainwaves going. What you guys seen was me straddling that bottom seam, obviously here at entry points at both ends of the corner in turn 1 and turn 3. Very important to recognize that. If we go higher above those dash lines, it's okay, but then we start running into a lot of issues of the splitter really getting into the bumps and really the car getting upset being too high. So that seam, very important to use as a reference point this week, and recognize that is going to be our reference point. Now, with that said, I'm going to let this play through for another couple laps here on in-car perspective, driver perspective, obviously. So let this go to about lap 6 or 7, and we'll talk about it some more. All right. Obviously, at speed, live perspective of in-car and what we had a little bit in chase view the first couple laps. We fell off a couple tenths just in these 7-8 laps here, okay? Now, why that is, the rear tires are getting hot. You know, it's a pretty hot track. They're built at temperature at a really rapid pace, to be frank with you guys. And it's important to recognize what the bounce of this car is going to do. So with that said, on this perspective, I'm on benchmark this for this video, and to just to give you a point of view on this is a 2-gear setup. So in other words, we're in second gear, and why that is to make sure we're not having to upshift so much on a start, on a restart, and we really focus on limiting those extra variables of shifting going into turn one, for instance, on a restart or the start of a race. So we have a lot of options we can run for gear, just to be upfront with you guys on. So if you guys feel more compatible with a different gear, that is perfectly fine. I'll give some suggestions in the notes that you guys will have as well. So let's focus on the characteristics of this track. As you guys could see, my entry into turn one here, I'll play this a little bit slow. I'm lifting off the corner or off the throttle, obviously when the car is actually still kind of flowing into a small bend into, setting up for turn one. And where it is important to get to the brake pedal is obviously balancing the car right. It's a balancing act when you transition to the brake pedal here. And it's a short track, obviously. It's a half mile that is pretty aggressive in making sure your entries are stable enough, but making sure you got some cut and capability in turning in the center. Now, with that in mind, our braking, most important quality here in getting into turn one, and especially for turn three. You don't use too much brake pitching the car sideways, and you guys should have a good understanding on how to attack that transition to loading the front tires here, like I've talked in reference to other videos at like Legacy Phoenix, for instance, is to make sure you're balancing the car, keeping the front potential there, but not getting to too much brake load and really upsetting the rear of the car on entry. And with these hot temperatures, it's going to even feel more greasy in that avenue. So you got to be really precise in your entry speed and shaping through this section. You can tell I'm not really exceeding more than 50% brake at any point. I'm in this range of about 30 to 35% brake max. And once I get in this compression zone of turn one, obviously it's a pretty aggressive, radius to follow this line, for instance, right? So I'm thinking of it as a driver. I need to manage this whole consistent avenue, keep the front connected to turn, but not use too much brake to where I'm sliding the rear once I add more wheel input into this banking, because the banking is going to help you obviously pivot through the corner. And you have to realize you're trying to help the car out with the banking angle that you have and making sure you're keeping it optimal. Now, the further we get into here, you're going to see I'm going to decrease my braking. The more wheel input I add, obviously I don't want to have all that braking induced into the car, so I'm not shoving the nose of the car. An additional fact of where I'm overslowing the entry too. So now we're almost into the center phase of the corner, right? Like it's a pretty quick lap. You're running 19-second laps, 19.5-second laps. It's pretty quick to get through turns 1 and 2, and now we're in the center. Now, crossing this seam, you can do this a couple ways, a couple approaches. You've seen me cut across this seam. You can pretty much prolong this center to the turn 2 logo here to where you're crossing it at that point if you feel more comfortable with it. But to that same quality, I'm setting the car up to have all that pivot with the front end. The front's cutting. Now the rear's in a good neutral zone where I can actually keep this car turning and cut below the seam now. And where that's a good important quality is you're going to see after I pass that fence, I'm still above this seam. So I'm going to back this up for one brief moment, and you can see there's the fence line here, and I'm going through the corner of turn 1 into the center of 1 and 2. I'm still above this seam. But now, before I work to this turn 2 logo, I'm crossing this left front and helping make sure the car is still turning and really focusing on the radius for my exit of turn 2 at this stage of the corner. Why that is important: short track, much like you guys felt at Legacy Phoenix. Very important to how you load in the rear of the car as even as possible, meaning making the rear of the car have a lot of mechanical, attributes to it, helping the car get off the corner straighter, helping the car have all the grip to get off straighter. So you then, as a driver, can focus on being smoother, opening the wheel up, but also opening the wheel up with more throttle input as a driver. So play this through again. Turn 2, I'm starting to cut before that. I'm putting half the car, 3/4 of a car, or the whole car down there because I'm trying to make sure I'm getting the car balanced straight as possible. The further you get here, the more wheel input you're obviously going to have to use. So that means you're going to have to unwind the wheel at a certain phase. And if you're crossing the seam with all 4 tires, it can be a good avenue to keep all the grip all the way to the point you're crossing the seam. Or it can be a detriment sometimes as well because you're not precise in opening the wheel up at the right point with the throttle input you have. But you can see here, I'm not 100% throttle yet, right? But once I start opening the wheel up, you can see I'm going to go linear to 100% now once I cross that seam and helping balance the car straight, right? So this is 7 laps, 8 laps into the run here that you see. I'm not 100%, and I'm going to rewind this again. I'm not 100% just to be 100% around here, in this zone. That's just an avenue you can think on how you can get out of it the earliest part of a run with obviously grip into the tires. But I'm crossing the seam. I'm starting to be linear again, and I'm not 100% here, but I have the qualities to be 100%. But I don't want to because I don't want to slip the rear tires at this point because of how flat this section is and how much I'm actually still loading the car to the wall, which is an important quality to recognize later into a run when you have less rear grip. You have more wheel spin on the straightaway. You're going to have more wheel spin all the way to the Kern County Raceway logo and past it. So just because you get to 100% throttle, it does not mean you're going to be pushing lap time out of it, later into a run. At this point, the car has grip for it. The tires are not too hot, not too greasy, but there's going to be a crossover point where you guys are going to feel that it's not possible. So we'll touch on this about 5-10 minutes from now on how to alleviate that quality, later on, because it's going to happen if we have long green flag runs. If you feel like it's going to be a green flag race, I would not even get to 100% throttle moment, even in the earliest part of the race. So let's think about that. Now, turn 3 entry, I think, is probably the most uneasy feeling, as far as you really want to charge entry because you're carrying more speed and you have a straighter approach away from the wall and you're really angling this corner entry a lot more precise than you would turn 1. But it's also deceiving because as a driver, you have more entry speed capability. But at that same point, much like turn 1 we discussed, you don't want to overshoot your turn 3. You don't want to overshoot it and cause the rear to slide up to where, again, now you're going to have to be too active and regaining control of the car. So you can see I already turned away from the wall. Like my point away from the wall is before I'm actually fully lifting off the gas. I got some wheel load to the front. And once I lift and go to the brake, I'm not really moving the wheel input, as you can see. I'm keeping the car in a neutral zone once I go to those transitions of lifting off the gas to the brake and really pinpointing how much wheel input I would need and shape into the angle and line that I want to turn 3. So lifting, obviously already lifted. This braking phase, much like turn 1, I'm not using too much brake, keeping the car stable enough. Get into the banking, reducing that throttle. Earlier it was a good avenue for me not to have to use too much brake into this section here and let me, as a driver, stay under this line. So what that also afforded me was to make sure my entry speed's good with the additional factor where I don't have to use as much brake once I load into the banking of the corner, as you can see here. I load into the corner, I can start releasing the brake and add more wheel input. I got a little bit more grip to this, under the seam, and now can actually start angling for a lower exit of the corner. And you can also stay above this line, but find a point where maybe you cross this seam before the turn 4 that might give you a better attribute as well, which you're going to see about 5 minutes time, later in a run that might be possible. So rolling phase, you have a brief amount just before you get to the pit entry, wall, which at this point I am lined up perfectly with the wall. Like I'm at the blue barrels where the pit entry wall starts. So this is where I get my general, initial throttle. I'm carrying part throttle, and you can still see I have a lot of potential to exit lower the corner, right? And I'm not putting all 4 tires below the seam, because if I cross that seam, once I start opening the wheel up in this zone here, I don't really want to break the rear free at this point, even early on. I want to load the car, like I mentioned in the video, of as even as possible with the left rear and right rear having the same amount of potential and capabilities to grip, and make sure I'm just opening the wheel up as straight as possible once I can, keep the angle of the corner exit like I want. So go on at this stage again, not 100% throttle before the lines. Still not 100% throttle. Now I got the car angled to where I have enough room here away from the wall to pinpoint where my closest point I want to get to the wall is. And that is going to be near the start finish line. As you can see, the closer I get, that's the closest I'm going to get to that wall. So it was right at the start finish line. Now, this is obviously a debrief of one lap, the driver's perspective. I'm going to go to lap 20, and we're going to showcase this at speed, and then we'll debrief on lap 21 on, some potential of the car. Alright, you guys could see in the video, my time at 100% throttle wasn't as early as it was lap 8, obviously. And that's effectively 12, 13 laps of, additional running on these tires, to where that's changed quite drastically. My lap times, I fallen off 0.6 of a second from that point. And that's all from entry capability, meaning I'm getting a little bit loose on entry. I'm having to stabilize the car, so I'm backing my entry, my lifting point up. I'm not using as much brake once I get into this zone. And you can see here, I'm not using as much brake as soon as I load into the corner, so I let the front work a little bit longer. But I'm still not slotting the rear because I have the front and rear connected. And here you're going to see I'm going to cross over this. I'm going to cross over the seam right at the turn 2, logo off of turn 2 here. And I'm putting the left front below it, where we talked about last lap that you guys seen. I brought the whole car low off of turn 2 here. And once I worked closer to the wall, I carried a little bit more throttle. And as soon as I got to the wall, my 100% throttle moment was getting me too squirrely. The rear is pretty soft in that avenue. The car's changing a lot dynamically. At this stage, when we're on the throttle, the rear is pretty squatted. The front is popped up. It's just trying to battle for that mechanical grip for us for this week. So that's going to be an attribute of the car that we have to recognize and refine, obviously, with practice laps. So now turn 3, same thing, same approach. Lifting a little bit earlier, but I'm also setting up the entry into this zone a little bit softer than I did the first, 8 laps. Now, rolling zone, partial throttle, you're going to see just before now, because my center speed's slower than it was, obviously, on sticker tires and better tires. So I got the car angled where I want it to. I'm getting a partial throttle. Here again, cutting below the seam, keeping the left sides below it. Partial throttle. Still squirrely. 100% throttle a little bit later again. You can see how much this potential of the rear tires is not there. And I'm going to let the last 5 laps play out here so you guys can see real time what it looks like, for a couple laps in cockpit view here. And then I'll change the last 3 laps to chase view so you guys can see some attributes. So let's go to lap 25, and I'll let this play here, and then a couple laps, just let it roll to a chase view. Now you see I'm not 100% throttle at both straightaways effectively. I want to get to it. Now I am on a back stretch, but for turn one entry, I got to have the car stable as much as possible, so I may not get 100% throttle just to do it. Let me change this to chase view for these last 2 laps. You'll see how much the rear's dancing when I get to 100% throttle moment. That's just adding a little bit more rear torque and, ask of the rear tires to get capability and, grip. So if you guys feel you can't do it, don't do it. I mean, it's as simple as that. Just keep it consistent. You don't really want to spin them on the straights. That's probably the easiest spot is to spin these tires on the straights. It's 30 laps though. So to kind of debrief final thoughts on this, approach of this racetrack at Kern County Raceway, the qualities we have to look at: entry stability, not overshooting entry with too much speed, not overshooting entry with getting off the brake too early and sliding the rear on entry. Okay, that is areas to where we have to break these corners down: entry, center, and exit in that order. And very important to get entry efficient here. Make sure we're stable enough. If you're giving up a little bit of time to somebody else, don't worry about that. Worry about hitting your marks. Worry about how you can connect the car better and its potential. So you have to do that at the earliest onset of a corner. As cliche as it sounds, I've said this many times in other videos, every corner exit has a corner entry. And you have to work at that at the earliest point and making sure your entry is efficient as possible to set up your center and then make lap time with the throttle off the corner, because that's where your lap time is going to come from. But you got to be the most efficient in that section and not dissipate too much speed. And there's many variables you can look at that at. So limit drive, is easy in limited drive by just being too aggressive with too much throttle too early. And additionally, you can limit drive because you slide in entry as well. So key factors to look at is those 2 things. And just to reiterate the final point, if you need better drive off, there's some gear selections we can look at. If you need to, just reach out to me. I'll give some suggestions, obviously, in the notes here on what I would do. But at the end of the day, it comes with that right foot as well and how you can actually stabilize the car for your exit. Make sure you're not getting 100% throttle and slipping the rear tires and really sliding them out just because you need to make lap time. This track requires discipline. We learned that a little bit at 3 and 4 at Phoenix, this past week, where we have to focus towards straightening the exit up, maybe even a lower exit point, and give up a little bit of time to where we actually have the tire last. So that is all we have for you on this week for our Pro Track Guide. And any questions, please reach out once again. Look forward to having a successful week with you guys, and hopefully we have some green flag racing this week. Thank you guys for tuning in.